Welcome to the Bennington Select Board meeting of Monday, December 19th. We're off schedule tonight, so the meeting will not be live, but it will be televised, so you can see it in a couple days. I'm Jeannie Jenkins, and I have the pleasure of chairing this board, and I'd love for my fellow board members to introduce themselves, starting with Gary.
Gary Corey.
Hi, Tom Haley.
Sorry about that. Jean Connor.
Good evening, Sarah Perrin.
Lovely. And also with us tonight, we have our town manager, Stu Hurt. We have our wonderful minutes taker, Nancy Lively. And tonight on CAT TV, we have Caleb Wiegerts, is that right? And Mike Cutler. So thank you very, very much. So first order of business is we want to add an agenda item. I'd like to add it as, I guess, 9A or B, 9B. What is that? 9A. And it would be Bennington Opioid Response Team letter for our review and hopefully approval. Could I have a motion?
I would move that.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. Nope. So we will do that then. All right. Thank you. So next up is the Pledge of Allegiance. Tom, would you lead us in that?
Of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Tom. And Jean, the birthday girl. Yes. Would you please read the vision statement, which guides our work?
Yes, I will. Bennington is a welcoming, engaged, inclusive, resilient community where everyone, regardless of identity, shares in our vitality and benefits from an outstanding quality of life.
Thank you very much. All right, so next up is the consent agenda, which are the minutes. We received electronic copies of the minutes of the meeting of December 12th. And we have a paper copy of the addendum, which was the executive session. Any comments? And we also have the warrants. Any comments?
I would move your adoption.
Oh, well, I have one comment. Okay, so, okay, go ahead. Move their adoption. Yes, for the purposes of
Discussion.
Could I have yeah, thank you, Bruce. Thank you. All right, so discussion. One thing on the executive session, actually, it says no staff were present, but Shannon Barsati and Dan Monks were present.
As was the manager.
Were you there too? Okay, all right. Full house.
I didn't
All right.
even put my name there. That's how bad it is.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Did everyone see the minutes that were sent to us this afternoon? You did, okay.
Okay, all right. You did not? Okay, so do you want to abstain from, okay, and we still have enough as long as everybody's voting for them. So all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, please say no. Any abstentions? Gary's an abstention. Okay, perfect. Okay, thank you all. All right, so next up, we have our bi-monthly update on the health of Bennington from Dr. Trey Dobson.
Okay, everyone. So I'll be real brief. Some COVID numbers. Everyone knows it's really just talking about respiratory illness now, but I'll break it down a little bit. Is it feedbacking a little bit? Stand back. COVID. So COVID in the state, it's waxed and waned. Today I saw there were 50 patients in Vermont hospitalized with COVID. 4 in the ICU, which is actually not so bad. Probably several of those people were hospitalized for some other reason and happened to have COVID. So let's call that maybe 10 to 15%. The rest have COVID as a reason that they're in the hospital, but most are not so sick that they need to be in ICU. Here locally, we happen to have 5 today, 1 in the ICU. What we are seeing is an increase in influenza. I think everyone knows that. It's been happening throughout the country. For some reason, it was a little delayed in our area, so now we're starting to see it. It'll probably peak just after Christmas, probably early January. That is putting a strain on the system, all of these respiratory illnesses. I just want to talk a little bit about what's going on in healthcare across the nation. You're probably seeing headlines, and you're probably not actually reading the articles because they're a little bit dull. They talk about the stress in the finances of healthcare. And I know a lot of people are also saying, yeah, and my business is stressed too, and education is stressed, and so what's different and what's new? Well, it is pretty shocking. This year, at the end of December, we're going to see greater than 50% of the hospitals in the country with a negative margin. And that is actually, to use a word that's overused right now, unprecedented. I've never seen that greater than, probably not since a little bit around 2008, and most of that was due to assets, diminishing, not actual volumes or revenue diminishing like they are now. And I just want to explain why that's happening. So a lot of it is the stress that all businesses are facing in the right now, with increased illness, decreased workforce to back up that illness. But it's also, healthcare is stalled right now, especially in hospitals and busy practices, because we can't get people out. And let me explain that. There are people in hospitals, especially larger hospitals right now, but even SVMC, that don't need to be there anymore. They can't go home because they don't have a home environment that is conducive to their well-being. But the skilled nursing facilities are not able to take them because of staffing issues and just lack of capacity. So what happens is the beds continue to be occupied by people who are 2-3 days have been there, and they need to be discharged, or maybe even weeks, sometimes even months, which is remarkable. And to show you how big of a deal this is, about a third of the beds at UVM, a third of the beds, 33%, are occupied by people that no longer need to be there. So what that means is many things. New people can't get in. It means people are waiting in emergency departments. It means people can't be transferred to places like UVM, Dartmouth-Hitchcock, Albany, Connecticut, Westchester. None of these places are taking patients at all. The most I've called is 17. I sat down and tried to call hospitals to transfer someone. 17 hospitals denied by each one. That's a huge financial hit. There's mission problems there's well-being problems, there's all kinds of problems, but it's also a big financial hit for hospitals, because I don't think people realize this, but every day those folks are in there, there's no new money coming in to take, but we still have to use the resources to take care of them. So all businesses are stressed, I understand. I'm explaining what's going on in healthcare right now, why we're seeing this, and it's going to take a lot of change in order for health systems to get out of this situation. So that's some sort of bad news. What's the good news? I think there is a lot of, I don't think anyone's sitting around saying this is a great thing. I think people are worried about it. They want to fix it no matter what state you're in, no matter what work you do. If you're a business owner, you want your health care costs that you spend on your employees to go down, not up, and they know this is driving health care costs up. So working with the state in that regard, Vermont is very engaged. There's only so much we can do, but we try to do things. The state is trying to open up what they're calling a step-down unit. It's not quite a skilled nursing facility, but a step-down unit that could house as many as 100 patients in the state, which would be very helpful. That would help get patients who can't get into a skilled nursing facility but can't go home into a place they can be cared for. While hospitals can then hospitalize those people who are sick and need acute treatment. I hope that makes sense. By the way, that's a great plan. You have to staff it, and I'm concerned that there are no people to staff those areas, so that'll be something we'll have to work on. Second, Dartmouth-Hitchcock, about 3 years ago, kind of contrary to what other hospitals were doing, actually started building a new bed tower to have more patients come in, and they did not stop during the pandemic. In fact, they kept going, which is great. So that's 64 beds that would be available in May. The problem is they can't staff those 64 beds because there's not enough workforce to do it. There were, when they were starting to build it, there was the prediction of workforce. So about 30 will go live in May, and it probably won't be until late 2023, maybe even early 2024 before all 64 will be open. But that's actually quite a few beds that should help in New England, and maybe some other hospitals will do the same thing. Dartmouth-Hitchcock and UVM are completely full. In other words, when I say they're full, all of the actual bed spaces are taken. That's not necessarily the case in places like Yale, Albany, New York City. When they're full, it may mean they have a whole unit of 30, 40 beds that are closed off that they can't staff. So there's two different problems there. It's in our area, it's actually not enough physical beds, and in some areas, it's not enough workers to be in those beds. So people are working on that. I think that this is not going to be a quick fix. We're going to see 2022 be a really terrible year financially, and 2023 may be as bad. Hopefully not, but it may be as bad. And then 2024, hopefully it'll be on an upswing. There'll be a lot of upheaval and change. It's going to take a federal fix, and you're going to see a lot of federal involvement there. And then finally, I get asked this all the time. I'm so tired of reading about it. I know you are too. What can you do over the holidays? It's just such a question. It hasn't changed. That's the good thing with all of this. It hasn't changed. It's all risk assessment, risk profile. If you're above 65 and you're healthy, you're still at a higher risk, and so you should probably minimize your exposure. It doesn't mean you should avoid your family. If you do go out and you travel and you go through an airport, that's a really high risk because you're encountering lots of people that are traveling, so it's probably a good idea to wear an N95. And I say this, I mentioned this the other day, and I think some people really get this and some people don't. If you do something that's, let's say it's about a 5% risk of exposure, that's kind of high, but let's just say going to an airport is a 5% risk. A lot of people will take that risk. It's not smart, but they'll take that risk. So I kind of reframe it and say, would you get on an airplane that's only going to make its destination 95% of the time and 5% of the time it's not? That's probably reframing it. And another problem is if you do that same activity 15 times, now you have over a 50% chance of exposure if we're talking about viral exposure. So when you think about those contacts, like, I really should think about my risk. Maybe I'll be with my family and we'll avoid masks and we'll just be together, and we know there's a tiny bit of risk there. But I won't travel in an airplane, and I won't go to a concert or a rave without a mask on. So, all right, thanks.
Thank you. Any questions from the board? Yeah, go ahead.
Trey, I'm wondering about the situation at our hospital with traveling nurses. I know that that's a huge cost. I believe they're paid substantially more than nurses on staff, and if there's the same thing with locums. And I'm just wondering, do you feel like COVID has really exposed the inadequacies of our healthcare system? They were always there, it's just now they're unavoidable.
Yeah, that's right. So I'll start with travelers. It's been a very big financial strain in most hospitals. The bigger the hospital, the bigger the strain. It can be in the tens of millions of dollars for places like UVM and Dartmouth-Hitchcock, which is a remarkable amount of money, above what would normally be paid. We've been extremely fortunate at SVMC. I think the most traveler nurses that we've had in total is 4.
Wow.
And that is a lot to do with leadership. It has a lot to do with circumstantial. I'll just admit, sort of luck, circumstantial. And then also just the culture of the hospital and the community in that regard. When I say circumstantial, just so people understand, if you're in an urban area that is fast-paced, you can imagine a lot of the workers are younger and they're able to travel and do that. And if you're in a more rural area, we don't have that population, so people are likely to be more stable and more committed to a job. That's going to continue. Traveling nursing is going to continue. It is mostly nursing. There are traveling everything else, though, lab techs and so forth. It's going to continue into 2023, but it's already much less than it was in its heyday of July and August of 22.
Thank you.
Other questions from the board? No? Any questions from the audience? We got Trey. This is our moment. This is really, it was really helpful to hear this overview of just what's happening in healthcare right now. I think it gives us all a lot to think about and to maybe worry about, but yeah, but it's helpful.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Trey.
All right, next up is public comment, and let's see, we'll start with Donald Washam, who is commenting on the 2023 Select Board.
Good evening and happy birthday.
Thank you.
At the last select board meeting, I announced that I was going to be running for a seat on the select board in 2023 race. Tonight, however, the last meeting I was at, I didn't reach out to people on CAT TV and people even in our audience and ask them for their support. And some of the issues that I'm running on are very concerning to me. I've been a resident here in Bennington for 10 years. And, one of the biggest issues to me is heroin and fentanyl. And then I guess my second issue would be school tax and property tax. And, Bennington's a quaint town. Somebody said I had a little 12-year-old girl say to me, "Why do you want to be on the select board?" I said, "Well, I want to be a part of the change. I want to be a part of the process." And I think it's easy for me to sit at home and scream and yell because I think that this select board is transparent. It may not always do or vote the way that folks want. Sometimes many folks in Bennington thinks that, most of the votes on this board are just in unison. There's never really any dissension. But I've been here and I've heard dissension, and I appreciate that because, and I say that in a respectful way because I think that, we can't always be agreeable on stuff. There are a lot of things that go on in this town. For instance, behavioral issues in the school here, major problems. And if you're a parent in a school, and if you're a teacher in a school, and you got 25 kids in a class, and you got behavioral issues by 5, that's concerning. Then we have affordable housing issues here. Another issue, a lack of housing, a lack of affordable housing. These are things that, this is why I'm running, because I believe that those things need to change. And the only way that we can do that is we need people to come out and vote. If you're a registered voter, come out and vote. If you're unregistered, register. Because I can stand here and talk until I'm blue in the face, but it's not going to change anything. And we need numbers. We need people to come out and say, hey, look, I care about this community. I want it to grow. I don't want to badmouth Bennington. I live here. I want it to be a better place to live. Thank you.
Thank you. And then next up, Deb. Speaking on Senior Center, yes.
Debbie Matt, Bennington, Vermont. It's a mixed bag that I have tonight. When I spoke before about the pickleball not being set up properly when they went to play, I have since found out that the Silver Sneakers class has had an issue. They evidently are only limited to 12 to 15 people in a class. So I would be very upset if I paid my $88 in order to play do silver sneakers and not be able to get into the class. So I am not in that class. All I can tell you is what I was told from a couple people that did not get into the class, and that was in November. I don't know how December has worked out. And I have discovered that the Senior Center is going to be closed between Christmas and New Year's due to lack of staffing. And I don't think that's very good. A lot of these people, they get out just for the socialization, if nothing else. And we all kind of keep an eye on each other, and if somebody hasn't shown up in a while, somebody gets on the phone to find out if they're okay or if they need something. When I questioned about the water at the town office, why we are buying water and there isn't water available there, I was told that I could attend the meeting in January when they do the budget, which I didn't think was a very good answer. And since then, a comment evidently has come out in the banner that it's something about where the water is and people aren't sure about drinking it. And I can't believe with the diverse staff that we must have employed in town that somebody couldn't break away someplace and tap into the water line and put a little water fountain in someplace so that we're not buying water. I'm just curious how much we're paying for that water. I'm sure we're paying more a gallon than what we're selling it for. And I find it very hard to hear when I'm sitting here, and I've questioned that before, and other people have, and I noticed that the heat has been turned up since I got here, which means the blower is running, which makes it even harder to hear. Now, I can't believe the thermostat isn't a Wi-Fi or a programmable or something, so that if you got to have it 70 degrees, that it can't be done ahead of time, so that thing's not blowing, competing with the sound. Thank you.
Thanks, Debbie. So some of those we probably, yeah, I mean, the acoustics in here are horrible. Yeah, we
Yes,
know
they
that.
are.
Yeah. So we'll look at whether there's a way to, I mean, we often turn the blower off when we're having smaller meetings. Yeah, but then it's cold. Yeah, so it's. Okay, that's something to look at. All right. All right, and we'll follow up on whether there is some way, I'm assuming Meals on Wheels is open. Shannon, I'm looking at you. Is Meals on Wheels open between Christmas and New Year's? I'm assuming. Okay. Yeah, so, okay. So we'll see if, thank you for bringing all of that to our attention. All right. So then, we're moving on to a Ben High update, and Dan Monks is up. And getting out of his coat, okay.
All right. I'm going to have Shannon join me since she's been working with me very closely on this project.
So you guys are going to have to speak into the microphone.
Okay. I think Shannon's up first, so take it away.
Okay. All right, well, we're here to give an update on the Ben High project. So just a refresher of what that's all about. It's about transforming the old Bennington High School, which then became the junior high, into a community space and as well as a new housing development. So the community space that we're looking at, that would be is used by the town, is 30,000 square feet. It would include a new home for Meals on Wheels and for the senior center. It would include reusing the old gymnasium there and refurbishing it, and having a new indoor rec facility, including fitness rooms and multi-purpose rooms run by the Y. The housing portion would be in the older section of the building and upstairs in the newer section of the building, and would include, at this point, 37 units of housing, both market rate and affordable. There would be an increased, really programming for all ages, but in particular for youth and for seniors. It would be improving the neighborhood, both on Main Street and on Pleasant Street, and repurposing and reusing a historic building that's been vacant since 2005. And it would also create space for community partners such as the Council on Aging and UVM Extension.
Just a quick recap of why we're here. So in late October, the Select Board directed staff to continue our pre-development efforts on Ben High with the goal of presenting to the Select Board in about 120 days a plan outlining the best way to proceed with the Ben High project. As part of that work, you asked us specifically to focus on 4 areas. And those include formalization of the public-private partnership with our private partner, Hale Resources, pursuit of additional funding sources, evaluation of ownership and lease models that would leverage funding and be the most cost-effective way of redevelopment, and identification of cost savings. So we've begun work on all those. We've continued our work on all of those areas, and Shannon and I will outline where we are to date with each one of those areas, general areas. So we are working with Hale Resources. We're working collaboratively to articulate the terms of a comprehensive development agreement. Both parties have retained the services of attorneys and consultants specializing in public-private partnership agreements to draft the development agreement. What a development agreement is essentially a comprehensive document that clearly identifies the responsibilities of the parties before, during, and after the improvements are done to Ben High or completed at Ben High. And we've already started to put together a term sheet with all the understandings between the parties. We're sharing those with our attorneys, and we hope to have at least beginnings of a development agreement within the next month or so. But so far, both the parties are on the same page. We're very clear about where we'd like to go, and there's been no hiccups to date between the two parties. One of the things that this development agreement will include are specific requirements that the Vermont Economic Progress Council will require for any kind of TIF bonding. If we do proceed with a TIF bond, we'll need to make sure that those requirements are reflected in that development agreement. And all parties are very well aware of that. Both the attorneys that we've retained are very skilled and experienced in that particular area as well. So we have good advice with regard to those particular issues. The other thing that we're working on, Hale Resources in the town, is the ownership and or lease structure that we'll use to redevelop the property. We're working with our attorneys and our economic development consultants to create the most cost-effective ownership or lease structure. Options will include, and they do include, the creation of condominiums, long-term leases, subleases, et cetera. I can tell you that currently, based on the discussions with our attorneys and reviewing all the funding sources, that it looks like the most effective way to proceed is for Hale Resources to purchase the building, and then for them to purchase the entire property, and then we create 3 separate condominium units: one for the market rate section of the building, one for the affordable housing section, one for the community space, and then there would be a lease. Long-term lease to the town with subleases possibly to other users in the community space. I just want to make very clear, I know some folks may not be fully up to speed or may not understand how this would work, but if Hale Resources was to own the property, they would be paying the purchase price, just to be clear. Somebody said the other day, why would the town give the Hales the building? We're not giving them the building. If they buy it, if they are the owners, they will pay the purchase price. So just to be clear. And then another thing that's really important is that because we are working with literally tens of funding sources and they each have unique requirements, we still don't know for sure how this structure is going to be and how it makes the most sense. So we do have our attorneys reviewing all those requirements just to make sure that the proposed structure that we have now makes sense, but I fully expect there will be tweaks and changes as we proceed. So, but once we do come to an agreement on that, and once all the attorneys agree that it makes sense the way that we put it together, that will be very clearly articulated in the development agreement as well. So there won't be any uncertainty moving forward once we have that worked out. I'm going to turn it over to Shannon because she's the one who's getting us all the money. And so she's going to talk about the funding sources.
I'm doing my best here. So just to give kind of an example of what Dan was talking about with, different requirements from different funders, some of what we're up against, which is a challenge, but we're getting there, is some sources of funding, let's say a certain kind of tax credit, historic tax credit, or new market tax credit, might only want no more than a 20-year lease. But then there might be another source of funding that wants a longer-term lease. So the good news is that we have very receptive state agencies here in Vermont that are working with us and that really are excited about this project. So just in the last 2 weeks, we've had 3 important meetings. One was up in Manchester. It was a whole delegation of different commissioners and heads of different state agencies came to Bennington County in Manchester at their public library, and that was a big deal because they don't often come our way. And they were there to talk about the sort of second phase of ARPA funding that's now available through the various agencies and what those eligibility requirements are. It was a great opportunity to ask questions, to meet people face to face that we've only seen in Zoom. So that was really important. And then later that afternoon, one of the deputy commissioners, Alex Farrell, he's the deputy commissioner of the Department of Housing and Community Development, came down to Bennington and we gave him a personal tour of Ben High. And he was there for a long time and was, really interested in the project. We were there, Dan and I were there with John and Zach Hale as well, and the consultant that they're working with on the low-income tax credits. So we had a lot of, good discussion there. And then the other meeting that happened that was organized by Josh Hanford, who is the Commissioner of Housing, he brought together what's called a housing roundtable, housing funders roundtable. So all of the various agencies that would be specifically funding the housing portion, but some that could also would be interested in our town portion, all convened. It was great because they did the legwork, and then we were invited to present the project. And Zach and John Hale talked about their portion, and then we talked about the town's portion and how we're working together. So we really have been in front of a lot of people in the last couple of weeks. And we've heard about some new opportunities, one of which is and this is all really focused on phase 1. So this is in addition to the $2 million that's already been committed from the town's ARPA funds. The first, I'm going sort of in order of how we're looking to apply for these, is the Community Recovery and Revitalization Program. So that's through the Department of Economic Development in particular. And it's ARPA funding that is for capital improvement projects. It can be up to $1 million or 20% of a project. So in this case, the town itself cannot apply, but nonprofits, particularly in Bennington, because we're a priority community, and in particular industries such as recreation and food services are priority industries as well. So I've been working with the YMCA and Meals on Wheels to put in applications that would basically be like tenant fit-up funds for their portions of the space, because we're looking at the town master leasing the entire area, and then Meals on Wheels and the Y being subleasing from us. So we're putting those in before the holidays, and then we're also going to be working on a downtown transportation fund application that's due at the end of January. And that would be for the site work, so improving the parking lot, for example, and those are $200,000 grants from the state. Community Development Block Grant funding is another important source of funding. It's most commonly, you hear about it for affordable housing, but also public infrastructure projects are eligible. And for example, like the Arlington Common project is something that recently received some community development block grant funding. So the next round, I believe the next application is in April. So we would be looking to apply for that in the spring. We're also working the last 3 with the Hales on kind of in partnership with them, because these funds would be really coming through the developer. So tax credits, historic preservation tax credits could be up to a quarter of the project cost. The new market tax credits are more competitive, but they are really an important source of funding for this kind of project. For example, the Putnam project received new market tax credits. Also, the Berkshire Family YMCA has done a big renovation down in Pittsfield, and that was largely funded with new market tax credits, because those kinds of tax credits are really focused on job creation, especially in economically depressed areas. So the Hales are involved in both of those, making that happen, and they're in the process of that right now. And the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the reason that funds could be applicable to this project is that we are a rural development area. So they have funds specifically for community facilities, which this would be, and those can be grants and loans. So if there's a gap in funding, that could really help with that gap. So that's kind of the last on the list, because we're hoping to fund this without loans. If you want to go to the next one. So that's the town piece, and then the Hales are very busy. They have put in an application to the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board for the affordable housing section of the building, which is going to be the newer section on the second floor. So we've had a couple of meetings with VHCB. They were also at the Housing Roundtable. That application is in, and they will know by late January if they've received that funding. Also, they can apply on their own for the Community Recovery and Revitalization Program up to $1 million for the housing section. So they're going to be doing that as well. They're also going to be applying for community development block grants. The low-income housing tax credits are specific to the affordable section, but a really important piece of the funding. Historic preservation, the entire building is eligible for historic preservation tax credits, the new market tax credits, and we are in a moment of some new funding coming available for energy efficiency and ways through the Inflation Reduction Act to use less fossil fuel. So there's a lot of potential funding there for a whole new HVAC system for the entire building. And then some other sources of funding for housing, VHIP, the Vermont Housing Improvement Program, which is based on that rental rehab program that was piloted here by NeighborWorks. That's now a statewide program, and then more energy incentives from Green Mountain Power and Efficiency Vermont. So I know that's a big list, but it just shows, it goes to show how much opportunity there is right now for funding.
I know that Shannon did mention that we're a priority community. The other thing that we do have in our favor is that we're a qualified census tract, so it gives us even more priority when it comes to the ARPA funding that's available. And frankly, without having this ARPA funding both locally and statewide, it would be difficult to pull off, well, it's difficult anyways, but virtually impossible to pull off a project like this. And the fact that we're in a qualified census tract really helps us to rise to the top of the list of projects that should be funded. So it's a nice stroke of luck for us. The final big area that you asked us to focus on is identification of cost savings, and we are working with our architect, Goldstone Architecture, as well as our construction manager, Engelberth Construction, to identify cost savings. We'll have another meeting on Thursday. We've been meeting pretty much bi-weekly to review this process and discuss other issues as well. But one of the big tasks that our architect and construction manager have before them in the next few weeks is identifying cost savings and getting down to what we think is the lowest possible number for a quality project. Some of the all this stuff pretty much folks know, but we're looking at things like alternate materials, reducing the scope of work where possible, whether or not project timing will help us. When we first developed our estimate, everything had to be done in 6 months. Now we have about a year. Gives us a little more time. Perhaps we can get some costs down from that standpoint. Shannon talked about just tons of money out there for subsidized energy efficiency upgrades. So one of the things that we're looking at, initially we had looked at doing air-to-air heat pumps in our section, the community section, but there's a real opportunity to use ground source heat pumps and actually bring the cost down, and have a better product. So that's pretty promising and very exciting if we can do that, because they're way more efficient and less expensive to operate. Very expensive to install, but low cost of operation. So if we can get that installation subsidized, that will certainly bode well. And that kind of goes to that's one of the big things that goes to the next discussion, next point, which may not make a lot of sense to folks, but I'll try to explain it. We talk about the possible shift of responsibility for constructing some of the improvements from the tenant/occupants to the owner or landlord. And just one example of that is if our private partner, Hale Resources, constructs a building-wide ground source heat pump system, it actually may cost us less to pay them to do our percentage of that work than for us to do air-to-air heat pumps in our own section. So we're looking at all those sorts of things and how we might save money by working with a partner that really wants to keep costs down for everybody. So that's some of the things we're looking at on cost savings. I'm sure if Jack and Jeff were here, they'd have other things to mention, but that's what I've got to share this evening. We do want to remind everybody that we have tons and tons of information online for this project, including a link to the public presentation that we did. So if you want to spend a couple hours catching up on the project, it's certainly there. We will also be posting information as it becomes available, additional information on there, including this PowerPoint, so that folks will have all the information as it becomes available. And of course, before our update in say March or so, when we propose our plan to you folks, we'll have lots and lots of information to go up on there before that meeting, so folks have a chance to review that. Not only just you folks, but everybody. So that's what we got today. Lots of work left to do. I am pleasantly surprised by the funding sources that have become available. We were, especially that community revitalization program, that's conceivably a lot of money that we didn't expect be able to come directly to the project from state ARPA funds. Of course, we don't have those funds in hand yet. Shannon's preparing the applications, but at least we're in a priority zone, and we qualify for the funding. So hopefully we will be able to have some announcements for additional funding by our next update. Questions? Fire away.
Yeah, so let's start with the board. That was a really excellent update. Thank you so much. That was really comprehensive. Questions from the board?
I have one question. If Hale buys the building, does that mean it will stay on the tax rolls and that there will be tax revenue?
Yes. Yes.
It's a happy
Thank
thought.
you. Yeah.
So just to be clear, so in order for us, one of our main funding sources that we think we may take advantage of, although if we can avoid it, certainly we will, is the TIF bond. So in order to have a TIF bond make sense, it has to produce tax revenue to pay for that bond. So it had always been anticipated that at least a good portion of the building would be privately held, but in the current scenario, it's looking like the entire building would be privately held, so the entire building would generate tax revenue.
Great.
Thank you.
Anyone?
I do, but you can do it first.
Oh. Sarah?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
So what is the reasoning currently for the 3 condo units to be split? And is that to be split like per level, or will the housing be
Sure.
mixed, or is just, what would that
So
look like?
the condominiums are really what the attorneys believe is the best way to meet the grant requirements, the funding requirements. So there are different requirements for each section. So the affordable housing portion, in order to take advantage of low-income housing tax credits and other funding sources, it has to be a separate entity. And the belief, at least based on the attorney's advice, is that a condominium would be best for that. So you have to separate that away from the market rate housing, which would be a separate condo. Now, it could conceivably be that there will only be 2 condos instead of 3. But right now, based on all the different funding sources, it looks like it's simplest. I say simplest. It would be it could work as 3 condos better than perhaps other methods. So it's certainly not something that we'd prefer to do, but it's something that we think collectively between our private partner and ourselves is probably where we're going to end up. Now, they may end up being all leases, long-term leases to separate entities, but right now we're working with a couple attorneys who it's definitely not their first rodeo on this kind of stuff, and they know what works, and they're both telling us probably condo is the way to go, but we'll see.
Yes, Shannon, or either of you, but you're doing the financing piece, I think. If we're talking a timeline of 120 days, not all of those funders are making decisions within our timeline. So what do you suppose, or what's your best guesstimate of the kind of information we're going to have, this board is going to have when you come back to us and ask us to make a decision to go or no go?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of things happening simultaneously, right? So if we're able to bring the overall cost estimate of phase 1 down, right now I think it's around, I don't know, 3.1 or 3.2 million. So if that comes down and we're able to secure one of these sources of fundings, like let's say the community recovery and revitalization and historic tax credits, essentially we're there. You know what I mean? So I think, but there's a chance that maybe one of those things won't happen. So then what's the alternative? So, I think that we're just kind of going out on all fronts and trying, and saying we have to do it all at the same time. So thankfully we have, really great partners that we're working with in the Hales who are doing their due diligence, and they're really all the tax credit pieces would benefit us, but that's on them to do that work. And then the work of the architect as well as Engelberth Construction is to try and bring that cost estimate down so that when we come before you in 120 days, we're closer to that gap, if that helps.
I think I could just add that, so what we've committed to do is present a plan. We don't think we're going to be there in 120 days where we can say, obviously, we have signed commitments from all these funders for all the money to build the entire project. I can tell you right now that will not happen. But will we have a plan that we believe is the most feasible and likely way forward, where we can say we've applied for this funding, and we think it's likely that we'll have a way forward. So we would recommend continuing until we get all the funding secured, or we might say, you know what, it's not going to happen, and we shouldn't continue. But I don't think we're going to say that, but we won't know for a little while yet. But I suspect what will happen is we'll be able to tell you how much the project is going to cost. Now, whittled it down to what we think is the bare minimum for a quality project. What the funding our sources are likely to be, and whether or not there's a gap. And we do have ways to fill those gaps. It'll be up to you folks on whether you feel comfortable doing that or not. Or you might say, you know what, hold on, wait, we need to see if we can find some more grant funding. We don't feel comfortable filling that gap. So that's really where we're going to be in 120 days, is give you a plan, hopefully, for a way forward. But if we honestly don't believe there is a way forward, then we'll give our recommendation that it may not be a role for the town in the project. But right now, frankly, I'm a lot more optimistic than I was even a month ago on us hauling down enough funds to make this happen. But we're not there yet, and I don't want anybody to think we are yet. We're working really hard to get to that point.
So that's the funding piece. Talk to me about the timeline that you anticipate regarding the draft development agreement, or what would be an agreement that we would then have to agree to. Do you think that's doable within the time frame that we're talking about?
What I would expect to have is to have if not a complete development agreement, at least a complete list of all the major terms, and have it be very clear between the parties that this is the expectations for both parties. Because we may not and probably will not have all the funding sources hauled down, we can't have a comprehensive and complete development agreement, but we can certainly have the beginnings of one, something probably more like a letter of intent or a term sheet that's signed by both parties, so it's very clear that everybody understands, hey, this is what we're working towards. One of the things that development agreement should have, and it probably won't at that point, is the long-term lease agreements that are going to be entered into. But we'll have the general terms of those agreements fleshed out, assuming that that's the arrangement we're going to move forward with. So
Right.
I think we'll have a very clear, much clearer idea, if not a very clear idea, about the relationships between the parties, the responsibilities of the parties, and the structure that we see going forward. And obviously, you folks can say, yeah, we feel comfortable with that, or we don't. And as I had mentioned, unfortunately, the vast majority of that will be dictated by our funding sources. And so we may have to be really creative in how we get to where we need to be. But that will all be spelled out and very clearly articulated for everybody to understand how that's going to work going forward.
One last question. Is there a reason why you have not mentioned who's representing us in this matter?
Oh, I could certainly tell you. No, it's MSK attorneys, not MSK engineers, although they're representing us as civil engineers on this as well.
Right.
Jeremy Farkas is our representative, and Craig Miskovich is representing Hale Resources.
Good.
You may know that he's very well known for new market tax credits expertise.
Yep.
So, no, I figure most people wouldn't mean anything to them.
I understand. Kill your interest in that kind of thing.
First, I just want to thank you guys. It's a tremendous amount of work that you're doing, and I just really appreciate your attention to this project. Am I remembering incorrectly, but has the number of apartments decreased? Okay.
So I will tell you why. It's a direct result of historic preservation. Originally, we thought we'd have 17, let's say we, Hale in the town, would have 17 affordable units. Unfortunately, they lost 2 of those because they were not able to reconfigure the rooms in accordance with requirements of historic preservation. A lot of folks, me included for a long time, thought, oh, historic preservation only has to do with what the building looks like on the outside. But that's not really how it works. If you want money from historic preservation tax credits, the National Park Service has very strict requirements about the exterior and the interior of the building. They very much frown upon any kind of change in the configuration of rooms. And if you do, you have to be very clear that this wall wasn't there when it was first constructed, et cetera. They don't like you to change fenestration, window locations at all. They're very, very sensitive about that. They're even sensitive about, which this one is new to me too, was material selection for finishes inside the building. So, for example, which is another kind of stressor between affordable housing and historic preservation, in the newer section of the building, they want the Hales to use institutional type materials, vinyl flooring. They don't want to cover up the concrete walls. So it's really when you were talking about meshing these different funding sources, it's remarkably complex, which is why we have an attorney helping us figure this out. But the affordable housing folks are like, well, we don't want it to look institutional. We want it to look like a warm and cozy apartment. And there are ways to do that, but you can't do it with flooring and other things. You have to be, maybe we'll put down throw carpets instead of carpeting but it's remarkably complex. Lots of competing criteria in all of these funding sources, now so it really brings home why it was so complicated to do the Putnam project. It's a very similar, although much smaller scale project here, where we just really have to try to figure out how all these funding sources are going to play nicely with each other. So.
Well, that leads into, it isn't really a question, it's a comment I think some people may be frustrated that it's moving so slowly, and I think that's just the nature of doing one of these projects, and moving really slowly and carefully is a really good idea, and it probably is required. I'm sure you would rather it go faster as well, but I just think this is the way these things go, and it doesn't mean that there's a problem or that there's issues. It's just really, really complex. So.
Yes, that's absolutely true. And actually, it's pretty remarkable how quickly, particularly the Hales, because they came in, a little bit late to the project, and how they just jumped on board and really have been able to, like that application to VHCB was just so complicated, and they got it in a short amount of time. But the one other thing I was just going to mention about why the overall number of housing units went down is that another requirement that's actually through community development block grants is that you can't build an apartment in a flood zone. And so the basement, there were units included because the basement actually has windows, that are around the edges. So they could have made nice apartments, but that's not going to be allowable for that source of funding. So they're looking at other possibilities for those spaces, but they won't be apartments.
Thank you.
Thank you. Questions from community? Yes, please.
Good evening. I had a question on early in your presentation. You
Clark,
mentioned.
introduce yourself.
Oh, correct. That's right. Thank you all know me. Clark Adams, Bennington, Vermont. Early in the presentation, there was a discussion of Hale actually buying the entire building and the community becoming long-term leases. So if they go and buy the entire building, what are the funding requirements for this project for the community if it's not the community's building, or the community isn't having an element of ownership?
Happy to answer that. So, actually, the ownership cost is significantly lower than what the improvements are going to cost. So, we have about it's between, depending upon how you look at it, between $1.1 and $1.5 million acquisition costs, and then we have anywhere from $6 to $9 million improvements costs just for the community section. It's probably another $9 million for the housing. So the acquisition costs really, although important, are not the large portion of the costs that we need, the funds that we need to raise. We need to raise significantly more money to fund the improvements than to actually fund the acquisition of the building. Just to be clear, Hale Resources is working on finding funding to acquire the building, but that's just part, and actually a smaller part of the entire funding stack that will be needed to buy and improve the building.
So Clark, is your question around if they own the building, what does it mean for the town to have a community section? Okay.
If they own the building, these improvements or the cost associated with improvements, how is it the community is going to be liable or involved with paying to improve private property? That's how, if they own the building, it's not the town's to improve. I understand the money long-term lease, we may have commitments in that sense.
It's a public-private partnership piece, but you guys should speak to that.
So it's very typical, even when you're not talking about long-term lease, but we will have a long-term lease, for tenants to pay for fit-up. So that's really what these fit-up costs are going to be paid, borne by those who are going to use them, which would be the town and their subtenants. So we'll be protected, that investment will be protected by a long-term lease, probably with several renewable terms, so that as long as we want to occupy that space, we will be able to get the benefit of our investments into those improvements. So the other way that it works sometimes is, a building owner may own the building, they may do the improvements for the tenants, but then the tenant has to pay a very large rent to pay for those. So our mission is to get any rent payment down as low as possible by paying for the majority of the improvements ourselves. There's nothing free, unfortunately.
I understand that. I was just confused in issues of true ownership. If the city or the town don't have a ownership stake in this building, we're renting it or long-term leasing. I was confused as to how and why we would be investing millions of dollars in something we don't own. And I understand you move into a property and you do a little work, you paint, do thing, and or demand those things be done. Of course, cost associated will go up, but it sounds to me like the project, all the work involved with the project, bringing the building up to the standards that we expect or need, but we don't own the building. We're doing all these things.
So the idea is that it's a very long-term lease. So we don't have to buy the building, but we have a lease, for up to, 150 years. I mean, it's whatever the lease agreement is. So we get the value, so it takes advantage. This allows us to take advantage of different kinds of funding streams. And that's really the reason to do that. Because then there'll be funding streams that are available to the private developer that we would not, as a municipality, would not have access to, and those are significant. So I think is that accurate? Is that?
Absolutely, you're 100% correct.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, is that there are things that by the Hales owning the property, they pay tax, whereas the town wouldn't. So all those tax credits, you start adding those up, and if you're talking 25 to almost 30% just for historic tax credits of the total project costs, and then if you're able to get new market tax credits or other kinds of tax credits, it brings the overall cost down. So
those costs are brought down to Hale or whoever your partner is, not necessarily the town as a tenant. You may be long-term leasee, but the actual financial benefits generated from those tax credits, from what I heard with the Hale project, that goes to them and they put it on the market to sell to other entities.
But then whatever benefit they get, it would then go to us for our portion. So let's just do a simple example. So it's a 100,000 square foot building. Let's say that they get $700,000 in tax credits. So or let's say they get $1 million in tax credits. So $700,000 of that would go directly to them, benefit their project. Then they would pass through to us the $300,000 that they got for our project. So let's say if they had to spend $300,000 doing improvements to our portion, we wouldn't be charged for that because they got tax credits that apply to our portion of the building. So it's a way to bring the cost down for the entire project, but with a proportional reduction for our part of the project. And I think, because I've experience with ownership models and leasing and financing, I think a lot of people think of, a lease really isn't the same as ownership, but it really is. If you have a 30-year lease, a bank looks at that as you owning the property. And essentially after 30 years, you depreciate the property down to almost zero anyway, so it doesn't really have a value to the bank after that point. And you'll have to reinvest to get that property back in useful. Most improvements after 30 years, they have to be redone. So we can decide after however many years our term, do we want to reinvest in this property, or do we want to say, you know what, we've got a better option here, there, or whatever. So it actually gives us flexibility, and it will also make sure that we're protected if we do want to be there for the foreseeable future, which would be, a century or so.
Great. Robert, come on up.
Good evening, Robert Ebert, Bennington. Just two questions real quick. One, why wouldn't all the housing units be affordable housing? And second, I don't think I saw or heard anything in the presentation about TIF, and so I was curious as to what role TIF is going to play in this project.
So first question with regard to affordable housing. So first and foremost, I think this board as well as staff believes that a mix of housing is the best way to accomplish any kind of project. We don't want to make all top end or all affordable. We like to see a mix of income levels in any project in any neighborhood. That being said, in order to make this project work, the Hales are going to have to raise some debt, and in order to generate a return, the market rate housing is the best way to do that. So I think there's a nice mix between affordable and market rate. The other thing that I think we'll want to make sure is if you are a big fan of affordable housing, the funding sources that the Hales are likely to use will require them to have 20% of the market rate housing section also be affordable for a period of time. So all of the 15 units in the affordable section and 20% of the units in the market rate section will be affordable. The ones in the initial 15 units that are affordable will be perpetually affordable. The 20% will be, there will be a term set by the funding sources and how long that needs to be affordable. So there'll be plenty of affordable housing, and there will be market rate housing, which I think is a great mix, frankly, for the project. You asked about TIF. So we've been really clear from the beginning that TIF is likely to be a part of the redevelopment funding for the community portion of the project. We see that going towards phase 2, which would be the recreational improvements, YMCA, up to $2 million. And that, again, that would be funded by a TIF bond. Folks will remember TIF bonds are funded by additional tax revenue generated by the project, so it's not an additional burden on the taxpayer. And the Vermont Economic Progress Council, through the development agreement, makes sure that the taxable value is set and agreed upon so that the taxes generated will cover any TIF bond passed. So that's how we can essentially guarantee that there will be no impact on the taxpayer, because in that development agreement that the developer agrees to, they have to accept a certain taxable level, and we know what that will generate per year, and that will cover the debt service, the bond payments for the entire period that we have that bond. So it's a commitment that the developer has to make in order for this to work. And they're fully aware of that, and so we don't have any expectation that that's going to be an issue going forward. But that's how we see TIF working. If we can do it without TIF, then we will. But I think a $2 million shot in the arm at no additional cost to the taxpayers probably something worth pursuing.
Yes.
Hello, Jack Rossiter Munley, Bennington. You mentioned, and I'm curious for a little more detail on the affordable housing aspect. You mentioned the affordable section and the market rate section, with the understanding that a mix of housing is the sort of most desirable outcome for any of these projects. Are there actually distinct sections within the Ben High project that are going to be an affordable section and a market rate section that are separate in any way? And are there any restrictions under which units can be offered as affordable or as market rate based on this information that there are certain restrictions around how they can be renovated?
So I'm sorry Zach's not here to be way more detailed than me, but I will do my best. So the permanently affordable units, the ones that need to be perpetually affordable by covenant, will be on the second floor of the newer section of the Ben High building, and those will be permanently affordable, 15 units. They will be funded by hopefully a Vermont Housing and Conservation Board grant, as well as many other funding sources. That's one of the reasons, again, that they have to have this condominium, is so that they can have a condominium with only affordable units, so they can take advantage of the low-income housing tax credits, as well as some of these funding sources. So, I mean, in some ways it will be separate, but it won't be like people will be able to go between the both sections. There won't be like a locked door that says, no, only if you have a passcode can you go into this section versus this section. There's no anticipation of that. As far as the affordable units that are in the market rate section, that's in the older section of the building, those will be indistinguishable. There'll be 20% of those units will have to be affordable, and they'll be mixed in indiscriminately throughout. And, obviously, actually the Hales had hoped to do that throughout the entire building, but because of the way that the funding sources work, they were actually forced to put the affordable units together in one space. And that was something they didn't want to do, but again, it's kind of like historic preservation tax credits. There are certain things you don't want to do that you have to do to get the money. It's their money, play by their rules. So that's essentially where we are with that. But agreed that ideally you'd have all the units mixed together so that there was no real distinction between the two types. And that will happen in the market rate section. The affordable units will be on the permanently affordable units will be on the second floor of the newer section. So there will be a discernible difference. That's where those are. But because the level of improvements on the exterior will be basically similar throughout the project, I would not expect anybody who didn't know the details of how this funding was done. I wouldn't expect anybody to know that, oh, geez, those must be the affordable and those must be the market rate. There shouldn't be any distinction from the outside.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, because I think for many of us, we were like, no, we don't want it to work that way. And the entrances, free access, I mean, it's one building, and it is, really being surrounded by the community assets that the town is bringing to that area. But the funding is something
I was just going to share that. Agreed, but one of the things that you are going to have are common shared spaces, entryways, green space, and like courtyard, elevator. So there's really an intermingling of all the people that are living there.
Do you know what the reason is why the funding sources require that? What's the reasoning behind that? Do you know?
You're wishing Zach were here.
You have to have a separate and distinct property that you can put covenants on and financing documents be applied to. So you can't have one unit over here in the building and one unit over here, one unit over here, because then how do you write a mortgage for that? It's an unfortunate outcome. It's one of those unintended consequences of the funding, because you hate to see that. But again, there won't, unless you know about the details of how this is structured, you won't look at the building and know where the affordable is versus the not affordable.
I was just curious what the reasoning was, but now I understand. Yeah.
So.
More questions? Yes, please, Joyce.
Hi, Tour de Cecilhart, Bennington. I have a question about the Hale ownership. Because the building is in such an important location, is there some sort of a provision in case Hale goes out of business, or their ability to manage the property changes in some way?
So if you're concerned about the town's, and I'll address the whole thing, but if you're concerned about the town's interest, that will be protected by the lease, regardless of if they fail or not. But the other thing is, for all of these funding sources, you have to show the ability to continue and be sustainable into the long term. They're not going to give millions of dollars to an entity that those funders don't believe has the staying power to continue this process in the future for decades, in perpetuity in the case of the permanently affordable housing units. So the other thing that's important in all of these projects that have this kind of funding, there will be bonds that will be taken out to ensure that the construction gets done, even if something happens. I mean, God forbid that your construction company goes bankrupt or something. There will be a bond in place to protect against that eventuality. If for some reason, again, extremely unlikely based on all the criteria they have to meet, but for some reason our private partner goes bankrupt, that bond will make sure that work gets done. So there's very, very little risk in these projects because the state funders and federal funders have virtually no stomach for risk. So you have to do everything you can, and it makes it much more expensive. But you have to do everything you can to minimize the risk and make it virtually impossible for the project to fail once the funding is committed. So
Construction would be done, but what about the ongoing management over your 150 years?
So if that ongoing management does not succeed, then the state and the feds will step in and require a different manager to take over. So these are long-term commitments that the state and the federal government ensure can be met. So like I said, there's virtually no risk involved once you get the funding in place and the construction agreements are signed.
Maybe this house is like a limit, and you have a first right
Don't even think that.
All right, other questions? Anything else? This was extremely helpful. I think this, I mean, it's very encouraging to see all the work. You've done a tremendous amount of work, and to hear your thinking about how it's moving forward.
And we'll be back soon with another update. And Jonah, questions in the email. What's the email address if people have questions? info@benningtonvt.org. So, and Jonah gets those, looks at them every day, and I know that when there's a question that he needs Shannon or me to answer, he's right, Johnny on the spot, and we try to get back to folks within 2 or 3 days at the most. Usually it's within 24 hours.
info@benningtonvt.org.
Yep.
Okay.
And also, lots of information on the website. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. I am owning that we are significantly off schedule, but that's okay, because that was really worth it. All right, so now we're moving to the FY24 budget overview, and I know we were just handed packets. So Stu, I'm turning this over to you.
Thank you. Yes, you have them tonight, and I'm sure that many of you will stay up late reading the proposals that you get. But just to briefly inform the community of what you're going to be looking at, this is a budget that is increasing 8.3%. It is impacted incredibly by the amount of inflation, and I'll give you a few examples. Salt cost is up about 13% over last year. Our paving in place cost is up 70% over what it was 2 years ago. 70%. As you all know, fuel and gasoline are higher than they are. We're starting to see a break in the inflation rate. November's inflation rate was down to 7.1%. October's was 7.7. September's was 8.3. So we're starting to see a reduction in the inflation. The unfortunate part is prices aren't dropping as inflation drops. They're coming down much slower. And so the cost of materials and the cost of doing business is higher. Our insurance costs are higher. Our wage costs are higher. So this was a very, very difficult year to try to bring the budget in at the 3 to 4% rate. We are close to the rate of inflation of September. Unfortunately, that will have a similar impact on the tax rates that we'll be looking at. And we generally, in this case, we will project the tax rate based on last year's grand list and last year's revenue stream. And it's important to understand that, because any growth in the grand list will impact the tax rate. Any grants or other sources of funding that we find before we start the new fiscal year will also impact the tax rate. And we don't set the rate until May or June. So please don't panic, but we are looking at a tax rate increase based on prior year's experience of 8.29%, which is double what we would normally see. But the places that we will look to make changes, potentially reduce projects, which is always difficult. I can tell you that based on the paving costs, we're going to be doing a little over 2.2 miles this year for what it cost us when we did 10 miles of road several years ago. And that we did 2.2 miles, I think, just this past year at an incredible increase in cost. So in order for us to reduce that tax rate impact, we're going to probably be looking to either project reduction, revenues that we are not in place now, speculation, highway grants, other grants that might be available to us as we come down the stretch, and as a last recourse to look at the fund balance. Just as we did this past year when we used some of the fund balance in the sewer fund to reduce the impacts on the rate increase. We also have that opportunity here. Obviously, my finance director and I are not necessarily overjoyed, and nor would we recommend that, but I think that's something that we can look at as we get to the end of the budget and you begin to make a decision about what you put before the voters. And there's really not much else. You haven't seen it, so enjoy.
Thank you. And so these budget meetings start the first Saturday in...
First Saturday in January, January 7th, and the 14th are the two that we know we will meet. We can also meet on the 21st if necessary. The second meeting in January is earlier this year than it normally is. The 23rd is the second meeting in January where we would be asking you to sign the warning. If, in fact, we don't finish up, we could possibly meet again on the 30th, that last Monday in January, to sign the warning. So even though there's a crunch time because the meetings are falling earlier in the month, it's not critical in order to get the warning out.
Okay.
And just to be clear, the budget meetings are open to the public. So if you really want to get a sense of what this process is like and really get down into the weeds, you should come to those meetings.
8 to 12 Saturday mornings.
Yeah, we're really happy at 8 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, but they
Yes.
are really informative.
Yeah, right here.
It's here, and town staff come to talk about budgets for their particular departments. It's actually it's really, really informative, and
And Cat TV is also here to film. They may not be
That is true.
live.
what?
But-
You don't want them to come at 8 a.m. on Saturday morning?
They're always here.
They're here. Yeah, I'm just saying the public can come
They
too.
don't leave, I don't think, but nonetheless.
No, you camp out. Okay, all right, well, thank you for that sobering update, and we'll be thinking. All right, so next up is the second reading for the Quality Control Internal Investigations and Discipline Policy. And just as a reminder, we looked at this at the last meeting, and this came about because town staff, including the Bennington Police Department, looked for other ways to accomplish what the Select Board had wanted to do in terms of moving the review of complaints against the police from the Select Board to the CPARB, which is the Community Policing Advisory Review Board. And we were stymied in that at the time that we put the CPARB together, understanding that because of Dylan's rule, we had two choices. One was to do a charter change, and the other was to ask the legislature to put in new legislation that would allow communities to do this. I think we are really fortunate that town staff, including the police chief and lieutenant, sat down and said, let's look at whether there are any other solutions. And the solution that we've come up to, that they've come up with and that we are reviewing, is a policy that actually, I'm assuming any community could use, because the general order that this policy came from is a general order for any police department. So, I think, I think this is a service to the entire community, the entire state.
Yes, you're right, because there is a portion of state law which allows for this citizen review of police actions, and this conforms to that section and could be used statewide by other municipalities if they chose to.
Yeah, so, kudos to our department. So what I'm going to do is, I think, first start with the board, and Jean and I sent something out, or Stu sent out something from Jean and me earlier today, where we had looked at the general philosophy, and had been interested in making that statement, I think, a little more neutral to fitting with a policy. So I'm just going to read what we're proposing, and that is, under general philosophy, the Bennington Police Department, BPD's goals include serving the community with integrity and professionalism, To maintain this level of professionalism and continue improving the quality of service the BPD provides to the community, each member must accept their responsibility for maintaining high professional standards. This policy is also intended to serve as a component of the BPD's effective internal affairs program, as contemplated in 20 VSA Section 2401-4. So that's a suggestion from us in terms of changes to the general philosophy. So that's one thing that's out there. I also just want to note that the word statute is misspelled under applicable Vermont statutes. The U needs to move, or there's an extra T or something. Maybe there's an extra T.
Yeah, that's not a statute.
Okay. And in section 2, under rights and obligations of the members, there's an extra the. On what line?
It's the second sentence, the procedure outlined just
Okay.
get rid of that the.
Outlined
In the.
Okay, right. So there's a the. Okay, so that's some cleanup. Other things we should be looking at.
Well, if I may, Jeannie, in origin of complaints in paragraph B, there was a question last time about what happens if an employee is complaining against their supervisor. We added language there that basically says that should the complaint be against a supervisor, the chain of command shall dictate who shall receive the complaint. Should it be against the chief, the town manager shall be the recipient of the complaint.
Perfect, okay. All right, and then let's go through and look at all the, and then under quality control and investigations, on page 4, C5, which is procedures, the chief or their designee shall have the authority to request relevant records and reports outside of the BPD's control as necessary for the investigation.
Right.
Yes. And then in 7, under C, procedures, the may became a shall. So it reads, upon completion of the chief's decision-making process, the results shall be provided to the town of Bennington's Community Policing Advisory Review Board, or CPAR. Okay, and then other changes.
We spelled tenants properly.
Okay, tenants is spelled correctly. That's good.
Tenants
Under discipline.
now, correct. Yep.
That's good.
And I think those were the only changes that we had. We did add a signature line at the end for the select board chair prior to the chief of police. And I know there were we didn't deal with definitions. We just didn't have the time to sit down and try to figure out what's important. But we have received some comments from outside about what definitions they're interested in, so we can deal with those. I'm suggesting we probably won't adopt this tonight, but we can deal with the suggested changes. There were also a couple of other wording changes that I think are appropriate, that we didn't talk about at the last meeting, so we'll be coming back to you again, probably the first meeting in January with another rewrite. And if any board members have suggestions for definitions and things, please let us know, because we read this and it's what we know, it's what we understand, and we just, I don't know why we need definitions, but I can understand where people on the outside looking in might think we do.
Okay, all right. Any other suggestions from the board?
Well, let me just ask a quick question.
Okay.
So who specifically should we let know about definitions? Stu? Okay,
Yes.
that's fine. I just want to know who to direct my, and Stu, if you want to know, the real reason to have definitions is that's how an outside party is supposed to read the terminology in the document. That's why. And you're right, this may reflect absolutely what we on the inside think we know, but we're not the ones that the policy is essentially for, believe it or not. It's for others. So in that vein, let me ask a question that I had meant to ask a week ago, but I didn't, and that is about the complaint form itself. Is there a complaint form?
Yes.
Currently? And is it quite visible? Because I had difficulty finding anyone. That doesn't mean that it's not there. It just means I wasn't looking in the right place.
Benningtonpolice.com is where the downloadable form is.
Yeah.
And on the new website, it's going to be all together. But right now, you can find a copy on Benningtonpolice.com. And right in the main navigation, there's a complaints link. And
I saw that. It didn't come down on mine, but that's okay. I trust you.
.org or .com?
.com.
Okay.
It's Benningtonpolice.com. That one, that's where I was, but for some reason it didn't drop. Okay. And there was a communication that we also received, and it was one that I had actually technically flagged. I am assuming that on page 4, and by the way, if we had these with line numbers and we utilize line numbers on pages, it would be much easier to review these, can I just say? And also, if we make revisions, that we use the standard process of using crossouts and italicizing additions. That's basically how every legislative body that I've ever been a part of has done this, including the United States Congress, but they're not a great model for everything. But at any rate, that would make life easier for me to read
Bruce,
both.
page 4.
I'm going to get there. I'm going to get there. But the format that we do these in makes this harder for all of us. I had to go back and see what was already there, and we X'd it, and when in fact you were crossing it out, but you didn't. That is it's a simple one. Under 1.
C1.
C1. IE does not mean for example. It means as in, or like, or the equivalent of. So in essence, what we would be saying, a supervisor may investigate minor complaints. That means rudeness. And I'm assuming we mean something more than that. I think what the draft means is, for example, an example of the complaint would be for rudeness.
Okay, so we'll make that.
It should be E.g.
Yep, okay, you got that, E.g.
They're easy to do.
Yeah.
They're easy to do, but it's...
Okay. Anything else?
And thank you for the shall at the bottom. Also easy to do.
Yeah, I think, looking over this, a lot of the changes that were mentioned in the last meeting that I thought should have been changed were changed, but also one of the ones that wasn't, that I wanted to mention was, let's see, I'm looking over both copies now because I marked up one last night while I was watching the meeting, and I marked up the one from today while I was reading it, so give me a second here. Page 7. Third, factors, third sentence down, or third line down, minimizing, change to eliminating possibly.
I don't know
Yeah.
where you are. Where are you?
What paragraph?
She's in the
First
first
paragraph.
The first
paragraph.
paragraph under D.
Okay.
Yeah, first paragraph under D.
Oh, here we go. Minimum.
Yeah, that's been brought to our attention as well, and
Yeah.
in talking with the lieutenant today, we both agree it should be eliminating.
Okay, and then another one that CPAR brought to everyone's attention that I also agree with is under discipline factors. Take out innovative. So it would read, but if an officer attempts to devise
A non-traditional solution.
So it would read, but if an officer attempts to devise non-traditional solution for a persistent crime or service problem and intentionally runs afoul of minor procedures, the desire to may carry significant weight in determining discipline that might result. So it would just remove innovative and encourage creativity. That would be my suggestion.
So you're leaving the desire to encourage creativity?
I don't see how that's not
And
a
I would be
sentence then.
opposed to that change.
I would too.
Nope,
I would
I
also
got too
oppose
quickly.
that.
So it would just,
So after, and runs afoul of minor procedures?
right,
How would
may
it
carry
read?
significant weight in determining discipline that might result.
That if an officer attempts to devise non-traditional solutions for a persistent crime or service problem and unintentionally runs afoul of minor procedures,
It
may
may carry
carry,
significant weight, yes.
okay,
Or that,
it may carry significant
that,
weight in
something.
determining any discipline that might result.
correct,
Okay,
yeah.
Can I ask a question?
of course.
How does that change the intent of the sentence? 'Cause I don't think it does.
I don't think it, I think it sounds a little too artsy.
As it is?
Correct, that's my interpretation. I think it just reads a little too loosey-goosey.
So I guess the question is, you're asking, Bruce, is are we opposed to an officer looking for an alternative way to solve a problem that might run afoul, that might unintentionally run afoul of a minor procedure? Are we opposed to that?
To me, it reads not a policy and it reads a little,
Okay, here's the way I read it, and this is why I think it should stay. The way I read this is that should an officer seek a somewhat unconventional way, I'll use that terminology, I'm not sure it matters which way we think of it, but non-traditional or unconventional solution, and thereby violates or runs afoul of some minor procedure within the department, it doesn't mean that they're getting off from discipline. Let's say if they've in the process have created a situation in which there was a complaint and they violated a policy, what it means is that their attempt to utilize a innovative and or non-traditional way of responding at that point in time is mitigation. It just mitigates the possibility of what the supervisor might in fact then impose. I don't think it's at all loosey-goosey. I don't think it is all artsy. I think it's precisely what I would want our policy to say, which is, if you choose to go this somewhat innovative or non-conventional or non-traditional way, and you violate a department policy, don't assume that and let's say you're successful, don't assume that that's going to get you off completely. It is a mitigating factor. That's what I understand this to mean. And I don't have a problem with that at all, because there is no way, in my humble opinion, there's no way for us at the policy level to micromanage that level of activity. It just means that the officer, that their approach that they took at the time, innovative as it might be, might mitigate the discipline, but it wouldn't entirely.
They might still get in trouble.
Of
So I
course.
guess the question is, can we just, are people in agreement that we think that that an officer using creativity or innovation in solving a problem is something we want to encourage? Do we have any trouble with the concept?
With the concept?
Not at all. I mean, I spoke
Sarah,
at...
you didn't have trouble with the concept, right? You
I don't have trouble with the concept.
It was just the word encourage creativity and innovation.
Correct, yes.
Yeah.
We received the email from CPARB with their recommendations, and I appreciated that, and I wanted to go with that.
Okay, and I think we'll let them speak for themselves too. I mean,
Yeah.
but And actually, I agree with you. I think
Yeah, I mean, well, we can't talk about this email in email, so this is when
Yeah.
we're talking about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think we have to realize that policing is an evolving science.
yeah.
It can't always be
Stagnant.
what it was.
Yeah.
It has to change.
I just think the sentence could be written differently and maybe with a little less
creativity.
word, yeah. Well, I just think it needs to be clearer.
So maybe, I mean, if we all think that the concept is fine, then could we just ask that, staff look at that sentence again? And, yeah, I actually, Sarah, am with you.
Yes.
Removing innovative and encourage creativity, just because it seems superfluous, because you're already saying non-traditional solutions. So, but it would be great if somebody would just look at it rather than us trying to wordsmith it, because that's just going to be.
I
don't want to do that.
Yeah.
I don't want to do that here.
Okay, all right, so.
And
this-
what's the significance of it focusing on persistent crime? That non-traditional solution for a persistent crime.
Or a service
where I'm
problem.
having
Service
some
problem.
difficulty.
Or a service problem.
But why does it need to be a persistent crime? I don't know.
And shouldn't the first choice be that the officer bring his idea to his superior?
Of course.
Well,
But
it sort of
sometimes you
depends on
don't
where
have
you
the
are.
time.
Right,
Tom.
right.
If you're out in the field, then you don't want to call it in. And I think, I don't want to be in a
Yes, it
position of
does.
saying that.
Right, but that goes back to what Gene was just asking, in that we're talking about persistent crimes.
Yeah, I didn't
Where
understand that.
I just don't see a snap decision being as likely.
Okay, so can we also look at that word, Stu? When you guys are rewriting this, of what is the,
Good luck.
what does persistent crime mean that just crime wouldn't cover? Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, all right, so other stuff, and I know CPAR, Tom got permission for us all to see the CPAR questions ahead of time, but I also want them to be able to speak for themselves. This was,
Sure.
it was more for, just so we had some idea of the direction you guys were thinking. So anything else on our end, and then maybe what we'll do is ask Kelly to come up and share CPARB's thoughts on this. And as I understand it, you guys actually voted on your,
Yes, Kelly Carroll from Bennington and CPARB. We did vote on one motion that included all of the items in the email that I had sent. And I'll just read the recommendation. A lot of them you've already addressed. One of the questions that they had was about the change in policy, and Jeannie, I think that you had explained that at the beginning with the way that the chief and lieutenant took a step back to try to find an out-of-the-box solution. So some of the other recommendations were removing the general philosophy. I believe that was already discussed. Defining and clarifying minor misunderstandings versus complaints and what the differences are. I think that some of that was talked also about with the definitions and getting information to Stu on that. Clarifying the role of the communications dispatcher in the origins of complaints, section 1, with the origin of complaints. What is their role? A little bit more specific if something should come in. C1, page 4, changing IE to EG for the rudeness. That was already discussed. Clarifying how often complaints reports would be submitted to CPARB on page 6. We're hoping for monthly to start because, we don't know what we don't know, and if we can get the information, then start to work through it. Defining the reason.
Hang on for a second. So where is that?
On page 6.
Yeah. Clarify how often complaint reports. Where does it state it?
It doesn't state how often the reports come.
No, but what section? Is it under?
I have it, it's on number 6. Upon completion of investigations, the investigator in charge shall prepare a report of findings which shall be promptly furnished to the chief of police through the chief of command. And we're just wondering how often.
Yeah,
That's
so
page 4.
we can add
Oh,
that.
page
Let's
4,
just
I'm
find
sorry,
it.
it's number 6.
Please don't add it.
Please don't add it.
Please don't add it.
Okay,
Look, every time you set something like that, a hard and fast timeline, if in fact over time that changes, then you've got to go back and amend the policy. If the CPARB is working with the police department to get reports and they wish to have them monthly, then simply ask for them monthly. You don't need a policy statement that casts it in stone, because then you've got to change the stone when you change your mind.
Good point, good point. And I think in that case, if you're, if for some bizarre reason the police won't give it to you monthly, then let us know, but yeah.
Well, that's
So try that.
if they're refusing, that's a different story.
Yeah,
But you don't,
so let's-
you don't,
okay,
you
so
don't need
let's
to put that
assume
kind
you
of
take
hard
care
and
of that.
fast rule in a policy.
Okay, good point. Okay.
The board is recommending defining the reason for the parameters in section C on page 6. The BPD encourages supervisors to verbally counsel and coach members for minor transgressions when appropriate. Counseling shall not be considered a disciplinary measure and may not need to be documented. And they're just asking for some clarification on that.
What kind of clarification?
Defining the reasons of the parameter, making it, the board was looking for a little bit more clarity on what might cause disciplinary action that might not need to be documented.
It's actually not discipline. It's specifically defined as not disciplinary, therefore it's, but I would agree there ought to be some way to identify when something is not documented.
Is that covered someplace else? I'm thinking
Under
it
verbal counsel?
is.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think.
I mean, look,
We want to not
we're all human beings here. Even police officers are human beings. Employees make mistakes, and they may take an action that does not warrant discipline, but it warrants counseling. Why? I don't understand why that needs to be documented at all.
So it feels to
I'd be like me taking Gary aside and say, Jesus, Gary, please don't say that again at a select board meeting. He's not getting disciplined, but he's being counseled, and that's all that says.
Yeah.
Now, we can maybe try to clarify it somehow, but.
Let me just say that it is confusing even to me, and I'm relatively, part of it is that it's, some counseling is not documented, some counseling is not disciplinary, and yet it is put into the guardian tracking system. And then there is a third kind of action that is taken and apparently is now considered a disciplinary action. There are 3 different sets of things there, and while I agree that there's a huge difference between just sitting down between the sergeant and a patrol officer and saying, here's where you could have done this better. I just got the call. Is that what happened? Yep. And here's how you do this better. That's verbal counseling, as I get it. But when does the supervisor know that it should go? It would be verbal counseling, and it would be making an entry into the guardian tracking system. That's the question I don't know the answer to.
And we'll clarify that.
That's what I think needs to be, and I think if that gets clarified, we'll be at least clearer.
So, because does the guardian tracking system have parameters for use that would be documented?
I have no idea.
Okay, all right, but you'll just clarify, okay.
Yeah, that would be helpful, Stu, thank you.
That would be great.
If I remember the conversation at the CPARB meeting, that was pretty much what they were talking about, what their confusion was. Who decides which counseling is worthy of being entered at
and
or
what's
not? Yeah, so I think that's where the confusion lay.
I'm getting the feeling, just by listening to the discussion, that I think this is one of those times where the CPAR board has never done what we're asking them to do, and when you're in a situation where you don't have experiences and knowledge, clarity is really, really helpful. And in this case, I think not having clarity is probably beneficial.
Maybe.
Or
Yeah.
some discretion.
Yes, everything's not buttoned up, and it's really hard for me, because I'm a person who loves clarity. But I can see the wisdom of not having clarity in this case.
The next thing was on page 7, replacing minimize with eliminate under factors in disciplinary decisions that was already discussed, and removing innovative solutions and encouraging creativity. And the discussion for the board revolved around persistent crime and the chain of command, and thinking that the officer should go through the chain of command. But like you said, you can't, sometimes it's not. So that's what we discussed, and we wanted to bring our recommendations and input for you to consider.
We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very helpful.
Thank you.
All right, so there will be a third reading on this, it sounds like. But we're getting close, and I think we're all, I mean, it feels like we're overall comfortable with this. We're down in the weeds right now, which is
I have
okay.
one more thing I'd like to
Yeah,
suggest.
go ahead.
Review date of 2 years.
Say again?
Review of 2 years after the adoption.
Oh, yeah, let's think about when we want it to be reviewed. Did you get any recommendations on that? Does 2 years seem,
I didn't.
okay? So 2 years would give us, yeah, I mean,
Since it's so new and the board's new.
that seems
Yeah.
good, yeah.
Right.
I'm comfortable with that. How about other people? Yeah?
And we have to think of 2 years from the adoption date, which will only be hopefully January, a month away. So, yeah, that makes
2023,
sense.
January 2025.
Yeah. Okay, all right.
Which is really soon, but it's a new board, so kind of just.
Yeah, no, I think you're right.
Yeah, right. There will be some new members at that point. Okay, so, out to the community, yes, your turn, Robert. Come on up. I know, we took so long.
All right, this is quick, don't worry about it. Robert Ebert, Bennington. Okay, so back on 7C, we've been talking about it. One, for definitions, I wouldn't mind seeing some kind of definition of what's considered minor procedures. I don't know what the guidelines are for that. So,
Tell us where you are.
Where you are, what section?
page 7C.
Oh, page 7.
Our pages are different than yours.
Oh.
What's,
We're back at
6C.
Okay, but if an officer attempts to devise, okay, we're back at that.
Minor transgressions and that.
Minor procedures. So anyway,
Under discipline.
That is page 7.
Roman numeral 5.
Under discipline factors.
okay, so if an officer is on the scene trying to deal with a situation and the policies and procedures aren't working, and that officer comes up with a different approach to deal with it, and that ends up in some kind of disciplinary procedure, that's one thing. I fully understand that the cop on the beat, on the street, dealing with an incident has to think fast and do what he or she thinks will help. That's what's so disturbing about this sentence. The example given here is not of the cop on the street. It's about a police officer with plenty of time to think about a persistent problem, coming up with a unique new idea to deal with that problem, and instead of going to his or her supervisor and saying, I've got this great idea, just going out and doing it. I can't imagine any organization that would encourage that behavior. So we're talking about, in defending this, I'm hearing you say, well, a police officer out on the scene has to respond, but that's not what this sentence says. If the chief wants to give leeway because what the officer thought up at the time violated a minor policy, I don't have a problem with that. It's an officer sitting there at headquarters thinking up a way to deal with a persistent problem and not taking it to his or her chain of command.
All right, so
I
that-
just can't believe that an organization would approve of it.
So we will, so Stu, I think, add that to your list of things on
Yeah, we've already-
rewriting
we've-
that
we've already
sentence.
Can I
talked
just
about
say
that.
that's a perfect example of why this is not a clear sentence, because that's not at all how I read that.
Okay, thank you, Robert. Any other,
Therein lies the problem.
any other questions, concerns, comments on this policy? Whew, okay. All right, I think we're getting close. We're getting close. All right. So thank you all for your indulgence in watching us struggle out
It
loud
happens.
on camera. Yes, okay. All right, so that, I think that's everything we need to do on this for right now. And then we have 9A, which is our added agenda item, which the opioid response team met maybe a month ago, and my memory is that town manager and Chief Doucette and maybe the lieutenant
Lieutenant was there too.
attended that meeting. It was a well-attended meeting of community members that are members of the response team. And they put together a letter that they are asking everyone that attended that meeting and participates in the response team to sign on to, and it's going to the Opioid Settlement Advisory Committee, and it's being hand-delivered on Thursday, as I understand. So that's why it was sort of urgent. So I'm going to ask Jean to read it because we didn't get it in time for the packet. We got it in email, but the community didn't. So Jean?
And I will warn you, it's long, so I'll read as fast as I can. Dear Opioid Settlement Advisory Committee, the Bennington County community and the Bennington Opioid Response Team, a county-wide partnership with over 50 community members, stakeholders, and representatives from our local delegation, continue to advocate for an integrated approach. That's a typo.
That's a typo.
They need to fix
Get
that.
rid of just "and."
Yep.
For integrated, got it.
To combat the effects of substance use disorders and improve quality of life for the Bennington County community. We envision a united Bennington County working in a compassionate, inclusive, and comprehensive manner for a healthier community. Through a sustained focus on implementing key evidence-based practices, we continue to gain support as we move toward our goal of ensuring all individuals and families impacted by addiction can gain equitable access to high-quality prevention, treatment, harm reduction, and recovery services in their own community. In anticipation of the distribution of the opioid settlement funds, we identified 4 key priorities within our community. Number 1, prioritize local recovery housing and recovery supports. There is an anticipation of 2 recovery residences opening in late summer 2023. The first recovery residence will be operated by Turning Point Center of Bennington County with a focus on men. The second recovery residence will be operated by VFOR, Vermont Foundation of Recovery, with a focus on women and women with children. Financial investments in local systems that support VFOR and TPC and other organizations to create programs that ensures ongoing excellence across all recovery homes is needed. Keeping costs to a minimum, minimizing barriers, and creating high-quality services is crucial for long-term sustainability. Number 2, expand rural access to care for individuals with substance use disorder through a continued investment for preferred OUD treatment models, also known as medication-assisted treatment. While Bennington County has a robust spoke system, we lack access to more intensive hub-level treatment in our community. Those in recovery have to travel to Rutland, Brattleboro, and/or North Adams, Massachusetts to access the right level of care. This present system impacts the ability for people in recovery to access services, I think it should be, and to create a full life. There's also extra periods.
I know.
Right, okay.
I'm
Number
doing
3.
it as we go.
Okay. Increase equitable inpatient detoxification treatment programs in Bennington County. Detox beds are a critical need in the southern half of Vermont. The nearest treatment programs for detox include Valley Vista and Serenity House. Barriers to accessing these services include geographic location, transportation, and lack of capacity, and create challenges for individuals with SUD seeking treatment, that's substance use disorder. Emphasizing a focus on this need will allow for equitable access to care for those in the Bennington County area. Okay, we're almost there. Okay. Number 4, increase navigation for substance use disorder service connection and justice-involved access. Positions such as substance use navigators, treatment navigators, care coordinators, etc., are integral parts for individuals needing to access SUD services and other services as well. Navigation and coordination of services allows for greater continued community outreach and provides direct referral to organizations specific for don't know what that means. For individuals, I'm just going to read what it says. To organizations specific for individuals seeking services. Linkages to services include primary care, mental health services, social services, inpatient treatment, residential treatment, recovery housing, outpatient treatment, and overall recovery supports. Furthermore, the need for navigation and service access for individuals returning from incarceration and/or are on parole is a critical need to be addressed. The most dangerous week of an inmate's life is when they return from incarceration, often without housing or support, return to the community they lived in when arrested, and relapse into using opiates. Proper service navigation and engaging resources provided saves lives. In closing, Bennington County, where the overdose from opioids rate is the second highest in the state, it is in critical need for additional and local prevention, intervention, recovery, and treatment options. The need for funding and additional resources are crucial. The community of Bennington County is requesting that the Opioid Settlement Advisory Committee prioritize our unique needs in increasing rural equitable access to services across our community. Sincerely, and the signatures will go at the bottom. Wow, there's a lot of editing to do in that letter.
Yes,
Okay.
there is.
I did, okay, I got
You got
them.
some?
I got them, holy moly. Okay, all right, but, setting.
That aside.
That part
Edits, yeah, typos aside.
The sentiment is,
Yes, are we, yes, I guess I'm looking for a motion to accept this with.
I would move that the board accept this document and send it with our signatures.
Perfect.
Second.
Any discussion?
Approve with edits?
Say again?
Approve with edits.
Approve with edits,
Yes.
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 Okay, so, all right, so all those in favor, please say aye.
Yeah, there's
Yeah,
a
Clark,
question.
please, come on up. That's-
I remain Clark Adams, Bennington, Vermont. This letter, this settlement, my question is, are we discussing a settlement with the established big pharma as the issue, and as a healthcare provider for almost 50 years now, with significant experience with people with substance issues? Of late, it seems to me the major focus is not big pharma. It's illegal drugs, opioid compounds, synthetic and natural, being brought into this country by drug cartels. And that organization, is addressing the institutional, the business, the drug industry, not the true major problem that's existing in America of illicit drugs on the streets of America. And I'm just wondering where in that letter it expounds on that, because isn't this a settlement from drug industry, not drug dealers?
No, it's
actually neither. there are settlement monies coming from the state
Correct.
that will be distributed. And so Bennington County has a very active opioid response task force.
But those monies are coming from the settlements from the
They are coming from the
lawsuits
settlements.
involving
Yes, that is accurate.
Big Pharma.
That's what I'm
Lawsuits
saying.
against
But the
large pharma.
But the point of this is to say, this is how we want those monies directed, so that it doesn't end up, I don't know, funding an ice cream parlor. I mean, it's.
No, I understand that, but my concern was, I think that there's a little bit of deflection or misplacement here. The monies are
It's not their
coming
charge.
from an industry to address a problem which has been linked to overprescription or misapplication of drug information.
That decision was already made in a courtroom.
Right.
Big Pharma has already agreed to a settlement, Clark. So
I understand.
so all this has to do with is
Make it-
Vermont's share of that
Correct.
money, of that settlement money. How does Bennington advocate for our share? And this is the way our local treatment community wants to respond, and that's why this letter is there.
I understand that.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying. I know there's a settlement because of what was basically malfeasance on the part of
Yep.
industry. But what I've been reading and witnessing is the major elements in our rampant drug deaths in America are not as a result of malfeasance of the drug industry. And I really would appreciate that being recognized, that we as a society need to focus on the real 800-pound gorilla in the room, and that is the rampant illegal drug industry.
And I think from our perspective, I mean, our police department is heavily focused on that. So that is not the purpose of this
And
letter, but
Clark,
I think your point is well taken.
Yeah, I don't think anyone disagrees with you at all.
I
That's just
think
not what
this
this
is
organization
really dealing
does.
with the agencies who are there to deal with the substance abuse disorder. That's really what their focus is. It's taking people who are addicted or abusing not only drugs but alcohol and finding them the proper treatment. Yes, we understand there's another problem out there, but these agencies are not the ones tasked with dealing with that problem.
Right. I understand that, but again, that letter, in my mind, does not truly reflect that. It's focusing
not
on
meant to.
the drug settlement issue,
That's
not the drug problem.
Right.
Right.
It's not
That's
meant
exact-
to. This letter is not meant to do that, but no one disagrees with you. Absolutely, you're right.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? All right, so all those in favor of supporting this letter and putting our signature on it with the edits that are needed,
Mhm.
please say aye.
Aye.
Any
Will the chair be
opposed?
doing those?
Yeah.
Will the chair be doing those edits? Or
We already done them.
you're coordinating those edits?
Well, I mean, if someone
Yeah.
wants to take, I mean,
I don't.
oh, okay, I mean, I checked every place that we needed to do it.
Okay.
so I-
Okay,
I mean,
good. That's
I
all.
think
I'm
it's
just
okay.
making sure somebody does.
Yeah,
That's all.
yeah, okay. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, great, all right. So I will do this and get it back to Alex Figueroa so he can.
By Thursday.
By Thursday, all right, thank you. All right, and next up, finally, the manager's report.
Well, thank you, and it really is short, but if I could, and normally this would fall to Jim Carroll to do this, but he's not with us tonight, I'd like to take a few minutes just to remember Joe Kruzik, whose funeral was today. He passed last week. Joe served on this board from 2008 through 2014, his latter term as chair of the board, and went on from here to be a very, very successful and very, very important representative for Bennington, the town of, and as well as Bennington County in the Vermont House. And I think that he was, well, for me, he was a true friend, but he was also an incredible leader, an incredible supporter of our municipal government here, a true believer in it, and he will be missed. And I do this really
from the bottom of my heart, but he was a tremendous human being. And so with that, I'll move on to just very briefly talk a little bit about Benmount Avenue and County Street, a project which continues. Some delays occurred due to discovery of lead lines there that were going to be replaced anyway. So that slowed the project down, but I understand we're still hoping for a completion date this week. A lot remains to be seen. It looks like the weather forecast for the remainder of the week is not too bad. Thursday's a little questionable. Friday, we're talking about 55 degrees and rain. So whatever snow we get on Thursday will probably be gone on Friday. So I'm hoping that we see a completion to this project. And we will be attacking the sidewalks and curbs and stuff in the spring for that. And just one comment on, back to Deb's comments at the beginning. We had water fountains in the town offices, and we did away with them principally for the same reason that we now provide drinking water to our employees and to the public that uses the building. Unfortunately, drinking fountains become contaminated by the use of the fountain, by people touching it, by the public using it on a constant basis. We found that there were problems being created when we had them in the town offices. We removed them. And as I said in an All About Town column, many people don't want to go into a public bathroom and pour water from the faucet simply because of the amount of use it gets from the public, and we don't know who's touching those facilities. So we provide that water to the public and to our employees. Yes, it costs us money, and the water is from Morgan Spring, if that makes everyone feel better, through Vermont Pure, but that's why we do it. Yes, there is an expense. It's not a tremendous expense, but people should feel comfortable in drinking water when they need to drink water in a building and not have to worry about whatever contamination may be on a given faucet or a spigot. That's why we do it.
Great.
And that's all I've got.
Quickly, I went with a friend of mine, went through the intersection of County and Benmont yesterday. Some of those potholes I've lived on dirt roads, and those are the biggest I've ever seen. I wonder if perhaps some better signage that's coming up, because if somebody hit that at speed.
Well, I suspect that they will be finished and taken care of when the project is completed.
Yeah.
So I'm expecting that kind of thing will be taken care of, hopefully this week.
Yes, I hit it without speed, and it was impressive. But I saw the road was closed again today, so.
Yes, they were working on it today.
Yeah. So be forewarned if you go down.
Everyone.
There are impressive potholes.
All right, so any other business? Gary?
Happy holidays.
Lovely.
I'll echo what Gary.
Okay, all right, go ahead.
I posted on Front Porch Forum, I don't know if it came out because I don't have my phone with me, but Tortoise and I were at the Martins game yesterday. Was that yesterday? It was yesterday. And a couple weeks ago, and oh my goodness, those games are really fun to watch. So everyone who's interested in basketball and supporting them should check out their website and look at their schedule. I think the next home game is January 8th, I think? 8th, yeah. Super fun. And they won.
Oh, good.
Oh, that even makes it more fun.
Yeah, it makes it more fun, yeah.
Yep. Happy holidays, happy Hanukkah actually today. And check out the lights around town.
Great.
On a very different note, sorry about this, but it's a thanks to Dick Sears for work that will be presented to the legislature this coming session on increasing his draft is available, by the way, the draft of that legislation. It was reported in the banner. It will be looking at ways to address those who are between the ages of 17 and 21 who are utilizing deadly weapons or deadly force and also selling drugs. That's not all of it. There's a good deal of work having been done on it. I would encourage you to look at it. It's not intended to be a big expansion of the use of the criminal justice system with youthful offenders. It is very targeted for this kinds of situations that we've seen here in Bennington. And I encourage you to look at that legislation and support it if you can by talking to your legislators once they get there or before.
And if I could jump in, it also creates a $10 million fund that will be focused on communities who are trying to deal with those issues.
Exactly. It also and I probably shouldn't even mention this one, but I will. If a landlord is reckless, not negligent, but reckless in basically renting to someone who is doing that, then they become liable as well under this.
That's true.
And I encourage our careful consideration of this and encouraging the legislature to move forward on this. It is a bit of a loophole in our state laws. Thank you.
Great. Wonderful. All right. With that, I'll look for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
So move. Second.
Great. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. No one's opposing, right?
Oh, it's
Okay.
just quarter after.